If the title wasn't provocative enough, I'm going to begin this episode by dividing all of humanity into four categories. Throughout this conversation, you're going to have to forgive the wind for interrupting us because I am once again recording in a field, but we do what we can to keep the show rolling, keep it going. So, for those of you who have decided to support the show, thank you very much. We are continuing on through your contributions. Again, from me to you, thank you. Now, on to the show. When it comes to pornography, I believe that all of mankind, or at least all of men, can be divided into four categories. And one of those categories, though, I believe is so small that it's not going to have any major significance yet at the beginning of this conversation. But after we go through kind of the hard parts and the hard details, I believe that it will be relevant in the end. And so this episode, as I've already tried to record it 3 times, is going to be one where there's no other way to say it. It's hard in the beginning, it's difficult, but then in the end, I think there's something good to come out of it. And I hope that you get that from it, as it has taken me, or as this subject comes up again and again and again in our culture, and again and again and again in our society. And once again, we are looking down the face of a great evil thanks to a film that came out. This whole Sound of Freedom thing still continues to go on. And last week I recorded an episode on, last week we talked about demoralization, and the demoralization that often comes right after some sort of morally relevant experience of this sort, or let's just call it awareness or awakening or whatever you want to talk about it. But so let's start talking about these four categories. The smallest category by far when it comes to pornography is going to be those people who recognize that it's evil and do not participate. And what I mean by do not participate, they do not consume, they do not engage in it. It is not a part of their life. And I'm talking about with these people that I'm talking about, we're talking about, well, I guess it's even more complicated, but it can be reduced to those who have access to the internet, those who live in the 21st century types societies where we have phones and computers with access to, or immediate access to, all forms of pornography at our whim. So the first category, which I believe is the smallest category, is going to be those very few people who exist in a world where they recognize, or those very few people who recognize it is wrong. It is a stain on society. It's an immoral action to engage in using pornography, consuming pornography, and so forth, and then also don't do so at all. Generally, they're quiet, but but there is the ability for these people to exist. We believe that this is a possible future. However, the majority of people, I believe, especially men, exist in the second type. So the first ones, let's just say they are the conquerors. The conquerors are those who recognize it's evil and have been able to get it out of their lives. The second people are the haunted. The haunted people, which consists of what I believe to be most men, exist in this category where they recognize it as evil, but in intervals or variations or from time to time or maybe even in seasons, they still find themselves consuming pornography. And this is I think this is the largest category of people, is that they are men who say pornography is wrong to have, to look at, to consume, but I am a weak man or whatever. Maybe I'm not a weak man, but in weakness we still indulge in sin, and so we want to find ways to get rid of it, get it out of our lives. The third category are the apologists, and they can be subdivided into what you might think of as like some sort of libertarianism, where they're like, well, you do what you want to do and I'll do what I want to do. It doesn't hurt anybody. They believe that the consumption of pornography is some sort of like harmless, or it's a libertine choice. And then there are those who say the other subcategory of the apologists are those who think that it is an actual good, that because pornography, say as an argument, that the use of pornography reduces aggression in men or something like that. And then, so this category, the apologists, are a strange bunch of people, very common, who believe that either pornography is a neutral, or it is a good. And then the fourth category is another category that I think is generally insignificant. And the closest thing that we can think of, I can put them in a cultural sense, they are like plastic. They mold to whatever the activities of the day are. Whatever the ethos of the era is, they just comply to it, and they don't have any thought or belief that is genuinely theirs regarding the subject. Again, this category I think is rather small, but it still exists. So the primary categories of consideration for today, when we're talking about the subject of pornographic material, is going to be 1, the haunted, and 2, the apologists. All right, adjusting for wind. And good. So, when we look at society this way, we run into a question. There are many arguments that are made back and forth over whether or not porn is, even saying it over and over and over again, pornographic material is moral or immoral, a net good or a net negative on society. And what most arguments tend to revolve around would be statistics. However, those of us who are familiar with philosophy and familiar with things like ethics and science and morals, and how those things have are of different categories, different ontological categories, we recognize that the statistics alone cannot actually provide a sufficient moral argument for either an imperative or a prohibition of sorts. And so what these arguments oftentimes look like is, since the invention of readily accessible internet-based pornographic material, we have seen a reduction in teenage pregnancy and a reduction in violent crimes like rape. And so their argument would be, because one is related to the other, they might even go so far as to say that because access to pornographic material has caused a reduction in these forms of aggression or decision making, it is a net good. In the same vein, someone might say something like, since readily the access of pornography was open wide through the internet, we have also seen an increase in male impotency, men not being able to function in their, let's call it, biologically designed ability. As weird as it sounds, that's what it is. Now, both of these arguments rely on statistics. They rely on some statistics that say, well, because this has happened, therefore we can say it's good. However, why this doesn't function within a moral framework is that it either relies on assumed moral principles, moral imperatives, or it sort of implies them then and goes along with it. Let's use the example of the argument made that pornography is a net good because of reduced aggression in men. And so the assumption is that it is good for men to be less assertive in this, not assertive is not the right word, violent in this this method. It sounds kind of ridiculous to talk about. And so anything that produces the outcome of less X must be considered good. Or it is good because it produces less X. Now, this is where the morality of the argument comes in. Is the outcome actually good, and is the process that produces that outcome also good? Because if the answer to either one of those is no, then it doesn't matter what statistic you can come out with. The answer is it's immoral. If you were to cut off the right hand of every man, you would reduce the amount of shootings that take place in the world. But you would also do it by removing the right hand of every man. Or if we castrated every man, there would be a lot less rape in the world, but it would come at the cost of what? This is how that argument really plays out. This is how the statistic argument ends up playing out. Is it has to rely on assumed moral premises, and if those premises um, are not answered, then well, we end up running around in circles over and over and over, never solving the argument. And so when it comes to something like pornographic material, one must ask whether the activity itself, either it's the production, the consumption, or the distribution of it, is itself immoral. Whether it's illegal and immoral is a different question, and just because we say something is immoral does not say that we should design a task force to attack everyone who does it. Those are different arguments, so don't turn this into a silly straw man. Now, the activity of pornography itself is immoral because it is the taking of something that is sacred and private and turning it into something that is public and profane. The old idea of the sacred and the profane existed long before the medieval era, or long into the medieval era, long before the Enlightenment, and the idea of the sacred and the profane was something like, there is, and you can see this still to this day in some Muslim cultures, that what is inside the house is pure and sacred. It is to be made beautiful and clean, and it is to be maintained and celebrated. But that which is outside of the house is profane. You have what is inside the home versus what is outside the home. And the idea of one of the reasons why something like pornography is immoral is because it is taking something that is sacred and is supposed to be between two people and making it public. And it is taking something that is supposed to be pure and good and turning it into something that is corrupt and ugly. This and a further evidence to this argument, or not even evidence, but a further way of thinking about this. If this argument is still like not sticking very well, think of it this way: why is it that when you look at the types of material that's the types of I'm not even say look at, but why is it that when you see it you even see its edges in film, like in the movie theater, why is it that the identities and the persons who are engaged in the subject oftentimes involve a person who is pure and a person who is corrupting? You have a lecher and an innocent schoolgirl. You have somebody who is presented with all of the trappings of of something that is supposed to be pure, and you're turning it into something that is profane. Again, once again, we are taking that which is pure, we can even stretch into the whole pedophilia argument. But you're taking something that is clean or something that is supposedly innocent, and you are making it filthy. You're making it guilty. So the idea, in some sense, the idea that one would have to try to create an argument, or someone would have to argue over whether or not pornography itself is moral or immoral, is kind of a ridiculous argument. The other thing about it, it's not a ridiculous argument. It's a strange place to be, for sure. We know that it is evil. Why do we entertain it as if it is good? We know that it is wicked to take something innocent and turn it into something corrupt. We know that it is evil to take that which is sacred and turn it into that which is profane. And you may ask, well, everyone has their own idea of what is sacred. This is true, but many of us are wrong. We are just simply wrong about what we think is sacred. Or what we hold sacred to ourselves may be a personal matter, but that is not the same thing as something like this. And the thing that is different about it is because the very act of sex is a private matter between two peoples. And the act of making it public is not only scandalous, but it is itself a corrupting of its purity. It is immoral in that way. So, what does this mean? What does this have to do with our lives today? I believe pornography is another example of one of those types of societal evils that leaves people demoralized because, like human trafficking, it's a problem that seems to be so big that there's nothing any one person can do about it. It is a problem that is so invasive in society that it does not seem to have any one solution. Even if you take out somebody like, even if someone like Jeffrey Epstein is taken off of taken out of the market per se, it doesn't mean that there isn't somebody else to take his place or he is the only one engaging it. When there's when you have a transaction, there's a buyer and a seller. And what do we do about that? How do we think about that as a society? And the demoralization that happens in our culture happens when you have the prevalence of a moral evil that people know is evil that they believe they can do nothing about. This is why I believe that there's going to be a period of demoralization that comes after the awakening or the awareness that people acquire through seeing a film like Sound of Freedom. They tell themselves, we all tell ourselves, wow, this is so horrible. I wish there was something I could do about it. There's nothing I can do about it because I live in blah, 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 blah. I do not work in law enforcement. There's somebody in the way. I have moral issues with something like vigilantism and so on and so forth. But I know it's evil and it's out there and there's nothing I can do about it, but I know it's evil and it leaves people damaged. Well, how about let's change the way that we think about it. Let's change the way that we address the subject. For all of my life, I've been hearing people say something like, the West is falling apart, or it's going to hell, or it's collapsing, or whatever. Some sort of doomer-pilled attitude of the West. And in reality, there are many facets to something that there are many facets that contribute to this worldview. There are many facets that contribute to some of the issues that we in the West are facing. Sure, we may live in moderately decent economic times, but in exchange for an economic struggle, we live in an era where many of the greatest struggles that people deal with on a day-to-day basis is not putting food on the table, but answering the question why they would do it in the first place. They have nothing. What do we live for? Why would I continue? I have no value anymore. I am worthless. These thoughts, the beliefs, the things that we hold on to inside of us seem to be more pressing problems in our day and age. Even within gun culture, we have access to all of this material and all of this content and all of this equipment and even more of this training, and even those of us who find ourselves able to own the stuff and do the things, like own the stuff and train, oftentimes find ourselves coming to the end of what feels like a precipice or a cliff, and that is answering the question of what for. What am I training for? Why am I doing this? Why am I buying these things? Is it a hobby? Is it a lifestyle? Is it a conviction? Is it something that I believe is right to do? Or am I just turning my pastime into what could very well be considered a religion? And that idea, that core problem, sits at the heart of the West. Is what are we living for? Why are we here anymore? What are we moving towards? And problems and things like pornography contribute to that, let's call it, identity crisis. And so I'll go so far as to say, I do not believe that there is a positive future. There's a positive future for the West or for America so long as they hold the status quo when it comes to our viewpoint or our apathy towards evils like pornography. We look out into the world and we see plenty of people virtue signaling away about the climate or about racism or about whatever it is that fits the de rigueur whatever it is that fits the regularity of the day, whatever it is that is the current thing. And yet at the same time we see that happening, where the moral grandstanding of the world, of our country, of the West, is so consistent, is so loud on subjects that seem that may not even be real, or are quite literally the opposite of what they're talking about. While we see that happening, the moral outrage, as you might call it, the impotent moral outrage of the slaver who wants to take your guns, whatever. While that's going on, we see other great evils, or we are aware of other great evils actually going on in the world. For every single person who's complaining about, I don't know, sexism, it's strange to say that wouldn't their efforts be better spent spreading awareness and fighting against something like human trafficking? And then one has to ask the question, why is it the case that we spend all this energy and all this money and all this time talking about potentially illusionary social problems while ignoring the very real ones under our feet? The answer to that question is that is human nature. It is part of human nature to avoid the problems but distract ourselves with illusionary ones. We do this all the time. I just made a statement. I just made a. I recognize that I just made a pretty strong statement. Now I need to ground it in something. The argument for that one would be, because man has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, because man has sinned and acquired the consequences of sin, the noetic effects of sin, we do not think as clearly and we make sinful decisions. Parts of the results of that, the corruption of the individual, is also seen in the corruption of the culture, and that is that we will waste our time and effort and energy on illusionary problems so as to avoid the responsibility of addressing the very real ones. That's that, and we'll leave it at that for there. So when it comes to this idea of pornography, we had those four categories of people. We had the conquerors, who it is not a problem. You have the people who are who are haunted by pornography. You have people who are apologists for it. They're either not really apathetic. They believe that pornography is harmless, which, we can talk about that. If it produces impotency, is it really all that harmless? If the use of pornography produces impotency, is it really all that harmless? That's a real question that's going to be hard for some people to answer. Then there's another, and then there are those who apologize for it or believe that it is actually a good. I don't know if that can be taken seriously, but it might have to be. And then there are those who just kind of go along with the day and age. And so when it comes to when it comes to a subject like pornography, even if we could somehow, even if we look past the issue that pornography itself produces impotency, and even if we look past the issue that it is taking that which is sacred and making it profane, we also must live in terms knowing that the financial benefit, or the financial element, this very same financial element that leads to the continued production of pornography, is also the same financial element that contributes to human trafficking, or to sex slavery, or to pedophilia. Pornography is morally adjacent to evils like human trafficking. And if that doesn't scare you, thinking that that when you're looking at porn, you are ethically one step away from trafficking peoples, then if that doesn't concern you, then, the next part will make sense. While we sit here and have debates over whether or not it is good or whether or not it is evil, at some point in time there will come a day where the sheep will be sorted from the goats, or the wheat will be sorted from the chaff. And this is a subject that I think no one really wants to be on the wrong side of. And it's consistent to the argument that those who are opposed to pornography believe in some sort of judgment, and those who are not opposed to pornography may not believe in some sort of judgment. And that's a very different. So I essentially have shown my hand before playing the final round. However the card game references go, you can at me about that. But so what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with a subject that causes demoralization in society, that is a genuine evil that exists both in the home and in the marketplace, that has a participation or adjacency with things that we acknowledge to be evil, like slavery and human trafficking, and that how close it is to that should be able to serve as a warning sign to our own selves that we are capable of great evil. We as individuals are also capable of great evil. It exists in a decentralized network. There's no one way to get rid of it, and and once again, it is a part of all of our lives in one way, shape, or another, with a few exceptions. And since you're probably listening to this on a device that's connected to the internet, there we go. We have moral questions to deal with. And when it comes to this idea of what do we do about it, let's start with ourselves. I believe, and I think or not. I believe when you see people, especially veterans, and veterans are going to know what I'm talking about. This one, when they find themselves getting out of the military and they don't have that sense of purpose, there is a period of struggle. And it becomes extremely demoralizing to think that you have all these skills, you have all these skill sets, you have all these abilities, you've learned how to do something, but there's no application for that in the world. There's no one knocking on your door asking you to join their anti-human trafficking task force. Instead, you're applying for jobs, getting underpaid by some mid-level management obese guy who probably has no plan to see himself better than his mid-level management job. I mean, I'm being sarcastic and pretty aggressive on that one, but maybe even a little bit personal. Oof. But what there's this case in point. There's this consistency across our culture where people feel like there is this thing out there that they could do, but they can't do it because of the way that society is organized. And I'm going to ask you, if that's you, to narrow your scope and bring it a little closer to home. If we want to end things like human trafficking, if we really believe that something like that is possible, it starts in the home. You have to. It may sound as simple and pathetic as a boycott, but it starts in the home, and it's not something that you can leave chained to a fence outside your home, barking at the door all the time. Pornography is not something. I think the demoralization that comes from pornography is not something that is solved by just simply saying no. It is something that needs to be actively sought out and destroyed. Look for places in your home that include it and get rid of those things. This might mean giving up hobbies. This might mean changing the things that you do. But there is no place, changing your habits, changing the things that you do, but there's no place in your home where it is safe to keep it. When you think about a game of spies or a game of espionage, any piece of information that a person has that can be used to leverage against them will be used against is fair game in essentially a war. So if we are really going to treat this idea that we are in a war for the soul of our country, as our president, I think, said, which is still funny, it's not ironic. It's just, yeah, there is a war for our soul, but which side are you on? And so, if you believe that you're in conflict with something, then you need to actively seek out and destroy things that compromise you to its powers, compromise you to its positions, or whatever you want to call it. And so I think we as a society can actively make an impact. We as individuals can do this by finding out where we have pornography in our country and getting rid of it, disposing of it, destroying it, shutting it down, closing it off, and and putting it away. Now, this is how it's pervasive, right? Because pornography is on the internet, and the internet's everywhere, and it's in my computer, and blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on and on. Well, this is where you have to choose to either be passive and let it rule you, or active and take steps necessary to remove it from your home. Purify your home. Start with where you live. Purify that. Clean it out. And then do that same thing amongst the people that you spend your time with. And do that again as you expand outwards. We can either passively sit by and be crushed by horrible evils, whether that crushing is the very act itself, or the demoralization that follows, or we can choose to stand up for what we believe is right. We can either be passively crushed by something as slimy as pornography, or we can choose to actively seek it out. There are ways that we can do this, but it starts in the home. So, what does this mean? What does this mean for us as a society? How does this fit into a conversation on gun culture and philosophy? Why are we engaging in a conversation about pornography when we could be talking about guns or training methods or gatekeeping or politics or gun control or all these other silly things, metaphysics, epistemology, so on and so forth? We're talking about this subject because we desire to live in community within one another, and we should make it a standard in our community, not just to hide it, but to reject pornography. We need to bring death to that which is evil. We need to die to ourselves, the things that yearn for wickedness, and we need to choose to pursue that which is good. And if that purging process is painful, so be it. I don't need to tell you to go out and do what is right. What I get to say here, and what has come to our attention as a society, is that it is up to us to choose how we will live this day, and how we will go forward, and how we will craft society in the way that we want it to. Though it may appear like some form of authoritarianism, so be it. We don't want to invade each other's homes, but I am making the argument that it is always and in every shape immoral for people to be engaging in pornography. As a result of that, death to it. Let's shut this down. Let's move on, and let's build a society where our children live with morals and our communities live in harmony with each other. Let's do this, and let's do this well. I don't believe that we can achieve this by passively waiting for somebody else to do the job. We're not all going to be in the position that someone like Tim Ballard was in, but we do have places where we can act and places that we have control of in our immediate vicinity. If that is your room or your home or your business or your community, find it, fix it, and destroy it. Get pornography out of your home. That being the case, we are closing down this rather assertive episode of the Redacted Culture Cast. So if this has been useful for you, please thank you. Thank you very much for listening. Please leave a comment below if you're on YouTube. We appreciate the ratings that you guys have left us on various podcasting platforms so we know how to continue on. We thank you for listening. And if you want to support the show, you can head over to redactedculture.locals.com. And that's going to be our discussion room page. And then you can also go to redactedllc.com and jump in on the pre-order for our shirts and our hoodies. If this has been in any way, shape, or form, inspiring or encouraging to you, I hope that it leads to action and goodness in your life. That being the case, go forth and conquer.